Okay, so let's look at biodiversity, ecosystems, and the resilience that we see there. Um, there are three types of biodiversity that we can look at. The first one is the aspect of community or the ecosystems as a whole. How do they survive together? Um, this includes a variety of habitats, communities, and ecological processes. So this is diverse, to say the least. So you have, again, variety of habitats, um, communities. By communities, we're talking about organisms and how they're living together, and also ecological processes. The water cycle, the nitrogen cycle, carbon cycle, all of those. We could look at it through biodiversity and how those processes occur. We could look at, instead, species diversity. Which is the number of species that are present in an environment and get a ranking of, well, how diverse is it? And then we could even look at, and we're getting better at now, genetic diversity. An example of genetic diversity we care about, elephant seals. Elephant seals, another creature we hunted down to just maybe 1,000 left. We have protected them and they have rebounded. There's 30, 40,000 strong. And so if you look at that from diversity set, they're doing really well. But if you look at it from genetic diversity, there's only a few males that actually reproduce with females. And so they're almost all genetically the same. And so they are genetically extinct. They have the same DNA and genes, and they don't have that diversity. So if the environment changes, they might not do as well as others. And so these are different levels we could look at to understand, is this environment biodiverse? What are the benefits of having biodiversity? Number one is for humans, medicine. We have many different things from the rainforest alone that is helpful for making cures, decreasing pain, and treating things. And we haven't truly explored those things. So if we wipe out the diversity and the options, we actually lose out on the potential of medical factors that's there. Agricultural. Food sources. Now, they don't even have to be food source that. We could actually even crossbreed and make some of our organisms stronger. And we go through what we call crop improvement. Making a crop a little more water tolerant, if you will, in different aspects in that way. Essentially, and not just water tolerant, also better to resist disease and to function. We also have just ecosystem resilience. We just talked about succession. More creatures in it, the more likely that this ecosystem, after a disturbance, and all ecosystems are going to have a disturbance at some point, it can rebound and get right back to its climax or the perpetuation of it to last. So this is just its ability to respond or rebound. After disturbance. So why do we care about biodiversity? Like, what services does that actually help us? Because most of us don't think about it on a daily basis. But if we look at what services we get for essentially humans, so this is the human benefit alone. Or biodiversity benefit, medicine did mostly benefit us, but we do have organisms that eat and kind of cure themselves in different ways. But let's look at just an ecosystem point alone. Number one will be food production. We've learned how to rotate crops to keep nutrients in the soil properly. These are things we've learned about because of biodiversity. The process of making sure nutrients cycle and stay in our environment and are reused and sustainable are things that we do care about. I did just talk about soil structure. I should include that. The other big thing is it helps purify water. Having water actually go through ecosystems and cycle through makes pure water and actually sustains the environment better. Another aspect for biodiversity is it stores carbon. We can't have all the CO2 in the atmosphere or oceans. It makes it more acidic and leads to acid rain and starts damaging life. So we do need places that carbon gets stored in that way. If you have biodiversity, you actually have organisms and bugs that help pollinate crops. Bees are not the only things that check out flowers and move on, but they are the primary one that we know. Kind of a big deal. With that same aspect is the regulation of pests, whether they're ticks, mosquitoes, bugs of some sort, or either larger ones. These are things, diverse ecosystems have predators that control aspects of that. And the other big thing is it helps buffer extreme weather effects. Either by stopping completely because it's taking out components that push weather to be more extreme, or by allowing for succession to restore itself faster, to say the least. How do we measure and preserve biodiversity? It's a big question, to be honest. We tend to look for species richness. We tend to look at species diversity. That's kind of the big one. Unfortunately, communities and ecosystems is a little too big to constantly track, so we tend to limit to, like, are there a lot of creatures in here? How are they sustaining themselves? This leads to questions. If you're looking at sustaining it, which species do you preserve? Which one's important? Which one should we limit the killing of or the destruction of? And how are they interdependent? If I destroy a creature because we want to eat it, does that destroy others? Is it like a keystone feature? Is it a partial keystone? To try to figure this out, we have come up with a complicated equation, but it does work. And that is the Shannon Weiner Diversity Index. It gives you a measure of how diverse the population is in mathematic terms, to say the least. Once we have that, we then can shift gears and we can actually look at conservation biology. So, conservation biology. How do we preserve ecosystems and sustain biodiversity? And all this is about conserving biodiversity. It's actually becoming its own field of conservation biology. In conservation biology, we have 5 things to look at. 1, do we protect individual species? Do we protect the individual? Do we try to preserve the ecosystem? Do we try to prevent habitat loss, which is also known as fragmentation? We have a habit as humans to break things apart and make them little pieces, not as a connected whole, fragmentation. How do we look at if the habitat is resilient and will bounce back from disturbance? And identifying where in the world do we have biodiversity hotspots? Where are locations that are more important than others because diversity is key and can sustain it? Most people go rainforest right away, but there's others around the world that we need to kind of identify and locate to understand, to help conserve and figure out how to manage biodiversity. We're going to be looking at each of these 5 in a little bit more detail, but that's at least a good start. Good luck.